Hi everyone, my name is Federico Tartarini, and in this video I'm going to explain how to use superclusters inside a React application. We're going to use React Leaflet to show a map in our React application, and we're going to use two main packages on top of React Leaflet. We're going to use supercluster, which is this package here, and we're going to use the React hook, which is called use-Superclusters. This second package was developed by Blake Halliday. He has also a very nice YouTube channel, so I recommend you to check out his channel as well if you want to find out more about React. But I decided to put together this video because with the latest version of React Leaflet, his source code was not working, unfortunately. Therefore, I decided to put together this video in which I'm going to explain how you can enable supercluster inside a React application. This is going to look like, so as we zoom in, we're going to see that the icons that are alone, so here we are displaying the crimes inside a city, so here we can see that there is a single crime in this area, and we can define the radius later on. We're going to just display an icon. Alternatively, we're going to have clusters that we can click, and we're going to zoom in and center our application, and as we zoom in, we can actually see where all the crimes were committed. I have to thank Lee Holloway because he put together all the code, so I mostly reuse his code, and I've added something in order to make it work with the latest version of React and React Leaflet. So let's go and let's move into the code because now we have already seen what we're going to get. Of course, you're going to be able to change the look of the groups. Right now I use league codes, which is we are going to display them in blue, but of course you can change that and you can customize that as you want to. Of course, you can also change this icon image, but I will show you everything. So I'm going to open the project here inside WebStorm. So here we have the files, and on the left we have a project directory. I created a simple application with Create React App, and I've added only a few packages. So let me show you all the packages that we have added, so you know what I'm working with and which version. So I'm using Leaflet, version 1.7.1. We're going to use the latest version of React Leaflet at the time of recording this video, which is version 3.2.2. We're also using React Query, which is a very nice library to query data, which is version 3.26. We're using Supercluster and use-Supercluster. One important thing that I would like you to notice in this code, of course, as usual, I will put all the source code on GitHub, so follow along with me, but don't stress too much about copying the code because the code is going to be available on GitHub. If you're using React Query, in my case, I got an error. So in the package.json file, you will have to change this part here, browser list. Okay, that's very important if you get an error. If you don't get an error, don't worry about that. If you get the type of error after you install the packages, you will also have to go here, node modules, and then delete the cache here. Or you can delete the full folder here, and then you can install the packages again. If on the other end, you're starting on a simple application, you can just install all the packages, and you can install all the packages by adding the packages to your project. I'm using yarn, so I can use this command here. I can use the command which is yarn add supercluster, use supercluster, leaflet, React Leaflet, and in our case we are also going to use React Query. So with just this one command here, you can install all the packages. Now that we've seen all the packages that we have to install, we can close here the terminal because once we install them, we don't have to install them again. And we can see the file that we have added also to our project. So we have added this uncaf.svg file, which I got from League repository. So the file is here, and this is just the uncaf. You can have a PNG or SVG image if you want to. Another important thing that we need to change if you have just started with a React project, of course, if you are already displaying a map, don't worry too much, but we have to add a link to the style sheet in order to display the map. So we need the style sheet in order to add the map. You can add a link, or also you can copy this source code here inside your project if you want it loads even faster. Then we have the app.js file. Here there is nothing much. I just am importing React from React. I'm importing React Query. Inside here, we are wrapping our application inside the query client provider. If you don't do this, and if you're using React Query, it's not going to work. And also another thing that we need to define is the query client. And here we can just use this code here. So const query client equal to new query client. Then we wrap all our components with this query client provider, and inside here we pass the client. We are also importing map. Map is a component that I've created, and I'm going to show it to you in a second. So this is my component here. And inside here, we are loading the data. So inside map, we are mostly loading the data, and we are defining the map container. All the code in which we are using to display the data, and this is the main difference between my code and the one you can find online, is inside here. So before, the map was just wrapped inside a map tag, and everything was fine. You could have used the source code that was provided online. But now that things have changed in React Leaflet, and we have to wrap our map with a map container tag, then we need to do things slightly different. So let's go step by step what we are doing here. So in the first part here, if you're familiar with the React Query, we are just querying the data. And what we are doing here is we are fetching the data, and then after the data are ready, then we are getting the data in JSON. Then we're getting is loading, error, and data. So if it's loading, we are just displaying this message, loading. If there is an error, we are displaying this error message. If everything is fine, we are just displaying the data inside our application. And we are returning inside this functional component here, a map container, which has a center, and it has a predefined zoom. In my case, I put these things which are static, of course, because I didn't want to make it super complex, but in your case, you might want to change this, because it depends where you're showing the data. For instance, this data here about the crime may change, and you may want the user to change city. So in that case, you don't want to have this value here hard-coded, but could be the average of all the points. So data contains a lot of information, but most likely, as it is explained in the use-Supercluster hook package, we are going to have to reformat those data. But let's have a look. So inside this component here, this functional component, we are passing the data here as data. So let's go inside show crimes, and let's see what we have inside here. So here we are importing React, we are importing some hooks, in this case use callback, use effect, and use state, and then we're importing L for leaflet. This is only needed because we want to display a custom icon, which is the cuffs here, the end cuff. So also because inside here we want to have that blue circle with inside the count number here. Of course that you can customize, it doesn't have to be blue, and you can also show other information inside that blue circle. So this is only basically to define that blue circle and the icon that we want to display when we want to show the one single data point. Inside here, of course, we're importing also other things, such as the show crime CSS. And let me show you that, so I don't have to show it later. So here we have the color of the text and background color, and we want to have it as a circle. We can, of course, change that, padding, width, height, display, and so forth. And here we are defining the CSS for the icon. So let's go back to showcrime.js here. And this is where actually the most important part of the code, because before it was just a bit of boilerplate code just to get started. But here we have all the important things. So I'm specifying a maximum zoom. That's not super important, but I will show you later where I'm using it. I'm defining here bounds and set bounds. So these are going to be the bounds of your map. So this bottom left point here and this top right point here. So that's very important because inside these bounds, we want to calculate the clusters. We don't want to calculate the clusters when we are outside these bounds. And I will show you later on inside here in the DevTools what do I mean with that. Then we are also specifying the zoom, because the zoom is also very important for us to update the clusters. And inside here, we are defining map, and we are using use map. So this is the key difference from the code that you can find online, because here we have to create another component which is nested inside the map.js. Otherwise, we could not have used that map. So here, if you try to put this one inside the main map component, it will not have worked. Here we are defining a function which is exactly the same as the previous one. So it's called update map. We are getting the map get bounds. This also has changed because now we can easily access the map by using get bounds. And inside the get bounds, we want to get the longitude and the latitude of the southwest point and the northeast point. The previous one that I showed you. So southwest and northeast here. So this function is going to be called the first time we initiate the map and every time you zoom in and zoom out. But let me show you that. And also finally here we are setting up the zoom. And the zoom is the map zoom that the user has selected. How do we update the map automatically as the person is navigating in our map or is moving around? With this function here. So we have constant, here we are specifying a function which is onMove, which use callback. And inside here we are calling update map. So this onMove function here is going to be called inside this use effect here, which has two dependencies. One is the map itself, and the second one is the callback, which is onMove. So inside here, this use effect, we are calling the onMove function, so when our user is moving the map. And this onMove function calls the update map function here, which is the one that I just described before. Then we have a React use effect inside here, which we are also calling it the first time the map gets rendered on our screen, and also updates the map. So again, it calls this function here, which defines the zoom and the bounds. Where the zoom and the bounds are important is because here are passed inside the use-Supercluster hook. So here we have to pass the points, we need to pass the bounds, and we need to pass the zoom. Also, optionally, we can specify the radius, so the radius of how many points we want to put inside, and the maximum zoom. So I will show you this also later on in the application. One final thing before I show you that is I want to show you how we have to remap the points. So when we get the data, we're fetching the data from online, we might get the data in a slightly different way or different format compared with what use-Supercluster wants. So here I haven't changed the code actually, I'm just using the same code that was provided online inside the use-Supercluster hook package. So here we are specifying the type, which is a features. We are specifying some properties. It's very important that you pass an ID here, otherwise you're going to get an error. And at the beginning, we are saying that it's not a cluster. So at the beginning, we map all these points, and we say that they are not clusters. The use-Supercluster hooks is going to update this value if it is a cluster. And it calculates if it is a cluster based on the radius here and on the zoom. Then inside here, we have the geometry. So geometry, we have to pass which type of feature it is. So it's a point, and then we have to pass the coordinate. So the coordinates, we pass the float of crime.location and .longitude. This is just because inside our object, we have crime, which is the main item here, which I'm mapping, and then we have the longitude and latitude are inside here, nested inside location. That I will have to change based on your data set. So let's go back and let me show you a couple of things here. So the radius, we have already seen that here, this point here is far from the other points, so it's displayed as a single point, while this point here are clustered because we have specified that radius. The maximum zoom in the use-Supercluster is this one. So now if I keep zooming in, okay, then all the icons are going to be shown here. So even if I zoom in more, I'm at this level of zoom, then I will be able to see all the items, regardless of how close they are. Also, another thing that I want to show you, which is very nice of Supercluster, let me show you the dev tool here. So here, if I move out a little bit, so as you can see now I have all the points, but if I move and I drag the map here, I'm plotting actually the number of clusters. So you can see that it is calculating all these 3 clusters. And the reason why it's calculating all these 3 clusters is because all the other points are outside the map bounds. And this is also very nice for performance reasons. Because think about that you have points scattered around all the world. You don't want to calculate the cluster each time. We just want to calculate the clusters of the points that are inside the map. Of course, you can specify other options. I kept it simple, but you can read the documentation and those you can just pass it in. Let's see what we are returning inside here, that we are almost done. So here we are looping through the clusters. So keep in mind that we had the data we map them into the points we map them into the cluster, okay? So here we are returning clusters, so we are mapping through the cluster. Here we are getting the coordinates, latitude and longitude, and we are trying to understand if it is a cluster and how many points count we have. So if it is a cluster, that point, then we are going to use that marker. And inside the marker, we are specifying an icon here with fetch icon. And then inside here, we are putting the location of the icon, and we are also showing the point counts. Of course, here, let me go back just to show you. So here count, and then you could have said point. Maybe I'm just actually putting too much inside here, but let's go back to our application. As you can see now, I've added point. It doesn't look nice, but I just wanted to show you that if you want to here, you're not limited to show just the number, but you can also show point. Okay, so we just prefer to show the number here. And let's go back here at the bottom. So here we are just basically just showing a marker, and we have added another event handler. This is also another thing that is very important because it's different from the source code that you will find online. So before in the old React Leaflet, you could use onClick. Now we need to use an event handler. And inside here, what event we want to specify is a click. And when we click, we want to zoom in and center. So as you can see here, we are setting the view with an animation. And we want to center the map around that cluster, and we want to zoom in. So let me show you the behavior. So here if I click on 124, that the map gets centered. Or let me show you with this 3 because with that one was not very clear. So I click on 3. As you can see, the map was now centered on this lane here, on this street here. And then we were zoomed in. Okay, so you can click on any point, and you can see that you get centered here. But in this case, we can further click and we further zoom. So finally, if the point is not a cluster, because here we have the option to be a cluster, by default we say that all the points were not clusters here. So if the point is not a cluster, well, we are just simply returning a marker. The marker, it can be an icon that you specify, that I showed you before, how to specify the icons, but of course, if you want to, you can also use the default marker that React Leaflet has. So here, as you can see now, the marker has changed. So let me refresh this page here. I can close here the developer tool, and as you can see now, all the markers now are just the basic marker. I think the other marker look much nicer, that's why I left it over there, but it's up to you to choose. One very important thing that I forgot to mention before while I was going through the files is this map.css file. This is very important, as you may have seen in my other video about React Leaflet, is because we need to specify the width and the height of the map. If we don't do that, the map will not render at all. So it is very important that you add this CSS file here. You could also have added it inside here. So inside map.js here, you could have added a style tag, and then inside here you could have specified the height and the width. I usually do that, but in this case I just wanted to have this CSS file here. So that's basically it for this video. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel, liking the video. If you have any question or any comments, or if I was not clear or there is an error in the video, please feel free to leave a comment down in the video below. If you like to support this channel, you can buy me a coffee, support me on Patreon, or join my YouTube channel. So you're going to get perks when I release new video and so forth. Thank you very much for listening, and see you in the next video.